Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Joseph Mogel here again. A few more writing tips on the thread of last week. Yeah, on the thread of last week. I'm kind of hoping this is going to be the last video in this particular set because I like to think that I've covered everything with this last video. And this should be relatively short. And really, it's covering two things from the first video. And this really I'm going back to the issue of professional writer versus fan fiction writer. And it was talking to a couple of people a couple of days back that got me thinking about this. Really, the thing that crossed my mind, a couple of friends of mine who were writers were speaking, it's a mentality amongst professional and semi-pro authors that we've somehow earned it. The process of going through editing, proofing, critiques, getting your work criticized like there's no tomorrow, ripped apart sentence by sentence, and come through on the other side has somehow meant that our work should be held to a higher standard, should be superior. And to be completely frank, if you would ask me about fan fiction a year ago, I would have said absolutely. I would have said that people who write fan fiction don't have the creativity or the artistry that people who write what fan fiction writers call original fiction. I say that because it's not a term that I use. For me personally, when I'm writing a story, it's just writing. I don't think of there being a separation between, and I think I said this in the first video, I don't think of there being a separation between the process of putting words down on the page and creating characters and personalities and plot lines and story structures, worlds. I don't see a break between that. That's all part of the same continuum to me. So I don't see it as original fiction, it's just fiction. So if you asked me about this a year ago, I would have had that pat answer. Well, of course. I got challenged by someone to read some fan fiction, and I'll admit there were a number of stories that were a little lousy. But there were some that were actually very good, and I read through them, and I was thinking to myself, well, gee, if you change the character names, change a couple of descriptions, you could publish this. Which is, in part, what got me producing this whole video series in the first place. This is something I've been mulling over in my head since I started this channel a few months back. How am I going to touch on the subject? Am I going to deal with fan fiction? It's a really touchy thing. It's hard. I don't want to offend people, but I want to get these ideas across. I want to make sure that people understand, from an educational standpoint, that you know what's coming if you're trying to become a professional author. So I hope that I've achieved that on some level. But none of this is stuff I would have even considered a year ago because I hadn't been challenged to read this fan fiction. I hadn't had the opportunity to actually compare and contrast professional and fan fictions. So I would like to think that, and again, I think this is something I said in the first video, that one of the big things in fan fiction is that it's a community. It's a group of people who are like-minded. It's a way of making connections amongst different people. And that's a very important thing. It's very important. But you have to understand also that amongst people who are professional writers, there's also a sense of community. There are unwritten rules. Like a friend of mine, a fellow named Jeff, great guy, brilliant writer, writing a multi-chapter novel. That's kind of redundant, actually, now that I say that out loud. He's writing a novel. It's a sci-fi novel. I had actually started writing a novella that had a very similar structure. And I just read his 4th chapter because he and I are part of the same writing group, and we critique each other's work, and I just read his most recently released chapter, and I realized that he and I had been writing the same story. So I scrapped mine. Why? Because I'm not going to take someone else's story. He's already writing this thing. And he's doing a brilliant job of it. So that's one of those unwritten rules amongst professional writers. You don't rewrite someone else's story. And that idea, I think, contributes to the way professional writers look at fan fiction writers. There's this unwritten rule between writers that you don't take what I'm working on, I don't take what you're working on, that's just how it goes. So to see someone else taking someone else's story elements, taking someone else's story almost in its entirety, and writing a new story using the same characters, the same plot structure, the same world, that's something that two professional writers would never do to each other. So I think it's a difference in community philosophy, I think is the best term for this. Where in fan fiction, it seems to be that the idea is if you enjoy it, the more the merrier. Whereas amongst professional writers, it's very much a this is my claim, get your own. It's a little more standoffish, a little more individualistic, a little less community based, but it is that unwritten rule. So it can be a challenging thing, dealing with the mentality of I've earned it, which a lot of writers have, and dealing with the differences in community and culture that you have between people who write fan fiction and people who are professional writers. So I would like to think that the professional writers watching this and the fan fiction writers who watch this have maybe learned a little bit about each other in the process. I'd like to think that there haven't been any flame wars in the comments. None of my videos have gotten too many comments so far, and I'd like to think that if any of my videos do get a ton of comments, that they will be positive and understanding and respectful, and no flame wars. I don't like that. I think that's pointless. As my dear departed granddad used to say, adults discuss, children argue. So I like to think that they are mutually respectful, enlightened discussions, and not just random name calling. If there are any big conversation threads, comment threads on any of my videos, any of these videos in particular. So that being said, I'd like to think that maybe we can bring some peace and have the fan fiction community and the professional writing community come together and not be angry with each other. All right, let's see if I can get this right this time. Zone in, zen. Almost. Like and subscribe below. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. You can get my email address to my YouTube page, or you can go to my website, which is in the link in the description below, and you can get my email address from there. Please feel free to ask me any questions. I will answer them in a video like this one, though probably not as rambling. All right. Thanks, and cheers.